Okay, I am Natalie Boyack. I am one of the lead garden horticulturists at Conservation Garden Park in West Jordan. And we've worked with USU Extension on the Urban Homestead Expo for several years now, and have presented at a lot of them. And we're happy to be back and participating again. And the topic that we'll be talking about in this session right now is Waterwise vegetable gardening, which is something that I am passionate about. I work a lot with water conservation at the garden, and I love vegetable gardening and being able to harvest the produce that we work so hard to grow. And so doing it in a water-wise, more water efficient manner is really helpful and something that that is a passion of mine. So with that, we will get started. There are lots of things that we're going to be talking about, and I will try to go through this pretty quickly so that we get through all of it. One of the things that we will not be talking about is specifically how to grow specific types of crops. USU Extension has amazing resources, which I have the website and a QR code for that at the end of the presentation. But some of the things that we will be discussing are some of the benefits of gardening. We'll briefly go over perennial versus annual plants and why that's important with watering. Location considerations, raised beds versus conventional in-ground gardens, drip irrigation a little bit, some of the types and basic installation, and how to use the drip irrigation most efficiently. And then also some maintenance very briefly. So jumping right into the benefits of gardening, it can have a lot of health benefits. It gets you outside in nature, moving and working, which can impact your physical health as well as your mental health. It also is a good way to socialize and interact with family and friends as you work together in the garden. It also has cost savings because you can produce your own food, and it's a lot cheaper to buy a packet of seeds than it is to go and buy a whole bunch of produce from the store. It also decreases the impact of having to transport that food. It also increases the variety of things that you can grow and the different types of things that you can eat, which has many benefits to your health and diet, as well as just being fun to try new things and see how the different tomatoes and the different varieties of squash and the different varieties all taste a little different. And so it's fun to see that when you have an increased variety. This is a red sweet corn that we grew last year. And then we have some husk cherries and a couple of different types of eggplants and some different summer squashes that we've grown in that photo. Annual versus perennial plants. Annual plants are those that grow from seed every year and don't have an extensive root system. So most of the typical vegetables that we think of are annual plants. They don't come back year after year and you have to start over every year. Perennials come back year after year, which allows their roots to be more extensive and use less water. And because these plants have such different watering requirements, we need to water them separately. So for most of the presentation, we'll be talking specifically about the annual plants and how to group those and water those the amount that they need. Site considerations. This is a big deal because you want to be able to have success with your vegetable garden, and we want you to have success with your vegetable garden. So when you're deciding where to locate your vegetable garden, there are several factors to consider, including sun exposure, how many hours of sunlight are the plants getting, the functionality, and how you're going to water the plants. With sun exposure, one of the things to consider is that most annual vegetables prefer full sun, meaning 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight. If a site with those locations is with those specifications is hard to find, one option is to try growing cooler season crops that can handle a little more shade. And some examples of cool season crops are broccoli and cabbage and lettuce. So there are still some things that you can grow in a little more shade. But if you want to grow the most variety and you'll have an area with lots of sunlight, that is a good place to put it. But another thing to keep in mind is that the site conditions may change over time. An area that is originally sunny, like this one, which is at the Conservation Garden Park, this picture was in about 2006, may become heavily shaded as the trees grow bigger. So this was it just a couple of years ago. The trees are way bigger now and they're all around and provide a lot more shade. So we have to be really specific and intentional about what plants we put in this vegetable garden. We have a different one in full sun that we can grow some of our other crops that need more sunlight in. Functionality. Where will your vegetable garden be most beneficial for you? Where are you more likely to use the produce from it and that it will stay at the front of your mind so that you can maintain it and harvest the produce? So one thing to consider with functionality is having an access path so you can get to it without too much difficulty, because if it's hard to get to, you're less likely to actually use the vegetable garden or take care of it or use the produce from it. A lot of people put the vegetable gardens in the back corner of the landscape, but I would encourage you to consider putting it closer to the house and preferably closer to the kitchen if possible. If you have an easy way to get to the kitchen from like a back door, that can be really beneficial because when you want to go pick a tomato for dinner, you're more likely to do it if it's closer to the house and you're more likely to take care of it. You also want to keep in mind the size of the garden. You don't want to plan for a big garden and then realistically only use a little space of that, because that is wasted space and more space that you need to maintain and space that could be used in a more functional way for you, that you would actually get out and enjoy that area of the landscape. So keep in mind and try to be really realistic about what you need and what you will be able to take care of and use. All plants need water, and so it is really, really, really important to keep in mind your irrigation system and how you are going to water your vegetable garden. If you are using an irrigation system, a vegetable garden must be on its own zone. in order to be the most water efficient. Because those plants do have such a different watering requirement than the rest of the landscape. You can accomplish this by retrofitting an entire existing zone or adding a new zone. And we'll talk a little bit more about drip irrigation in vegetable gardens a little later in the presentation. You can also use a hose connection and go to drip from that, which we will briefly talk about some of the parts needed for that. Or you can hand water, but you do need to make sure that it's close enough to a water source that no matter which way you are planning to water, that it's close enough to make that realistic. And if you know that you're really not likely to get out and actually hand water it once a day or a couple times a day, then maybe you do need to go with drip either from a hose or an irrigation system, because again, we really want you to be successful and have the tools that you need to find that success and have a good experience with vegetable gardening. Now that you know where you want your vegetable garden to be, it is time to kill the existing grass in that location. And there are a couple of ways to do that. You can use plastic sheeting and let the sun kill the plant. And you do need to make sure that the roots are killed before the lawn is removed. Or you can use herbicides like glyphosate or Roundup that can kill the grass down to the roots. Either method will take at least a few weeks to kill all the way down to the roots. And killing the grass is really important because it reduces your maintenance quite a bit. If the grass is still in the area, it can make it a lot harder to maintain and a lot more work, which I have some pictures of later. Oh, here is one of my pictures. I forgot I had this slide in here right now. So this is a vegetable garden that a homeowner had before they redid their landscape to be more water efficient. And you can see all of the grass coming up in the beds and the little space in between that's just wide enough for a lawnmower and makes it challenging to maintain that grass in the area. And that grass also becomes a weed in the vegetable garden. So they retrofitted their landscape. And this was what they did with their vegetable garden after. So they kept the lawn away from the area, killed the lawn, put gravel around the beds instead of the lawn, and that greatly reduces maintenance, and it looks really nice as well. Okay, so now you know where you want your garden. So let's talk about two main styles of vegetable gardens: raised beds versus conventional or in-ground gardens. They both have advantages and disadvantages, which we'll go over in the next couple of slides. But there are some basic things to consider. You want to consider cost, what you can afford, and the look that you're going for, what will be most functional and usable for you, and the space that you have. Some of the benefits of raised beds, they can be more accessible for people, especially those with back problems or with limited mobility. You can often grow more in a smaller space. You have reduced risk of compaction, improved soil drainage, and they can contain plants that like to spread and would take over your landscape if they were just in the ground. They do have some disadvantages though. Because they do drain more quickly, they also dry out more quickly. So you have to water more frequently. And they are also more costly to install them. Conventional gardens retain moisture longer. They also are a lot cheaper to initially install, and they can be easily moved and the area repurposed for a different activity zone or gathering area or something else that will fit that space better in the long run. But they don't drain as well. And they do tend to have more issues with compaction, and it can be physically taxing to maintain them, but there are still advantages, and lots of people still have conventional gardens. It just depends what works best for you and what your needs are and what you can afford to do. And you can always start with a conventional garden and then slowly add boxes as you as you have the means to do so, or if you decide that that might be a better thing for you based on your situation. So going back to raised beds, there are lots of things that you need to consider. Generally, you don't want them any more than 4 feet wide if you can get around them on all sides. If they're against a wall or something, you want them a 1.5 to 2 feet wide. This makes it so that you don't have to climb into the beds and can avoid more of that soil compaction. And allows you to be able to reach into the middles of the beds without too much difficulty, and greatly reduces the maintenance. You also want to keep in mind the height. You can have beds that are taller, like these in this picture, that can be used to sit on, to work in the vegetable garden. If you have someone in a wheelchair or something like that, you can make it tall enough for them to be able to reach from the wheelchair, so that they can be able to be a part of vegetable gardening as well. You do want them to be at least 6 to 12 inches tall in order to get some of the benefits of raised beds, but they can be pretty short, but they still help contain plants and can still have the better drainage. There are, I think I forgot one. Oh, building material, which is what we're going to talk about on the next slide. There are lots of different types of building materials that you can use. So we'll go through just a few of them. There are metal options. You can do wood. You can use bricks. And you can use plastic or vinyl. Or you can use a combination depending on what materials you have access to, and that is totally okay. But no matter what material you use, you do want to make sure that they are non-toxic, or line them with plastic or landscape fabric to keep the roots away from the potentially toxic materials. And there's lots more information about materials and how to build the boxes, and more information on all of this online that you can go and do your own research and get more information as well. You also want to consider the shape of the beds. They are often rectangular, but they don't need to be. They can be all sorts of different shapes depending on what fits your area that you have, and what will work best for you. So here's an example of one that's a little bit different shape. And this hexagonal one as well is kind of fun. But no matter what shape you use, you do need to make sure that there is enough structural support to hold the weight of the soil. And the taller and bigger the beds are, the more structural support you do need. Soil is really heavy, and if you don't have supports, then it can break the beds and cause problems. For conventional gardens, to initially install them, you can till the ground in the desired location, and then lay drip in a grid pattern, which we'll go over how to do that a little bit and why we do that. And you do want to have designated paths to reduce the compaction. And you want to cover it with mulch. If you're participating in any of the rebate programs and incentive programs that they have for landscaping, some of those will require that you have mulch. So just make sure you know what the requirements are before you participate in those programs. But there are many reasons why we cover the planting beds with mulch, including vegetable gardens, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. So because of those benefits, we do recommend that you add a layer of organic mulch yearly to your vegetable garden. It helps break down and improves the soil over time. It also helps reduce compaction and keeps the water in the soil more, reduces evaporation. And there are just a lot of benefits, but you do have to replenish it quite frequently. So that is something to keep in mind, but there are so many benefits to it. You also want to stick to designated paths to avoid compacting the soil, because vegetable plants do not like growing in compacted soil. A lot of plants don't. Weeds have adapted to that, and they do like growing in compacted soil, or they're more able to. So it can reduce weeds if you avoid compacting the soil. We also encourage you to not let weeds go to seed, because every time the weeds go to seed, it can produce more weeds either later that year or in future years. And so it reduces your maintenance quite a bit if you can keep on top of the weeds and not let them go to seed. But if they do go to seed, don't give up. It's okay, you can get it back. We all have things that happen in life that make us busy, and so we don't get to our vegetable gardens all the time. Please don't give up. You can get it back, and your vegetable garden will be fine, even if you let some weeds go to seed, or if you have to abandon your vegetable garden for a season, that's okay. You can get it back next year. Drip irrigation. So this is a very key part of water efficient vegetable gardening. So we will go over just quickly an overview of the process of installing irrigation in raised beds. So this is from a homeowner who sent us these pictures of when they were redoing their landscape and put in their vegetable garden. So they put irrigation, and they put, this is on its own zone. And so they put pipes that were stubbed up above the ground, where they knew that their vegetable boxes were going to be installed. They used raised beds in this yard, and they're taller than they will be at the end, so that you can always cut them shorter. But you get the irrigation pipes in place. Then you place your raised beds where they will be located. And you fill them with soil or some kind of a soil mix. And then you cut those pipes down to the soil level and connect and lay the drip line. And then this was later, after they had grown some of their vegetables, and you can see how much produce and how well those vegetables are doing on that drip system. So all drip zones need a pressure regulator and a filter. So you can do that with a retrofit head kit, which has a pressure regulator and a filter built into it. Or you can add one by the valve that has a pressure regulator and filter. But something to keep in mind is that the pressure reducers and filters need to be easily accessible, because sometimes you do need to clean out the filters, especially if you have secondary water. That is something that you do need to be aware of. If you are going from a hose spigot connection, there are timers that you can get that will connect to the spigot. And then there are pressure regulators and filter combinations that you can get to attach to those that then connect straight into the drip line. So that is one of the easiest ways to do a hose to drip setup. And again, you do still need the pressure regulator and filter even when it's coming from a spigot. There are two main types of drip that we'll discuss: inline drip that has the emitters built into it at evenly spaced intervals, and point source drip, where you have blank tubing and push the emitters into them and then run small tubing directly to the base of the plants. For our purposes, microsprays and bubblers do not qualify as drip irrigation. They are often sold as drip irrigation, but that is something to keep in mind. Is when we're talking about drip irrigation, we are not talking about microsprays and bubblers. With inline drip, the goal is to lay out the lines so that they are evenly spaced in a grid pattern, which will water the whole area evenly. So this can be done even when the shapes are a little bit different, but we still want to keep them as evenly spaced as possible. And one of our tips is that you can use a piece of pipe or cut a stick or something to the proper distance, and use that as you go and lay down your drip line so that your lines are evenly spaced. And we get a lot of questions about how to connect the drip lines together, and a lot of people will jump on Facebook and be like, so if you heat it up or dip it in boiling water or things like that, that can help. We do not recommend doing that. The lines don't go back to their proper shape very well. and it can cause them to come apart and come off of the couplers. So we recommend using a rocking motion like is shown in this video to connect the drip. So you just rock it back and forth and put a little bit of pressure on it. And it does take some practice, but you can get there. If you need help, we're happy to help you figure out how to do it. We also have some other classes about irrigation that discuss it as well. Did you have something, Ginger?
Well, I was wondering, would you want to take a couple of questions at this time?
Sure.
We have a couple on the irrigation. There was one question that came up very early in your presentation. Are there any annual vegetables that can be perennialized? So say if you had a greenhouse and overwintered them from season to season, what are some annual vegetables that works for?
Yeah. So I know tomatoes can be grown year round. If you take them inside over the winter, they can be grown in pots and they're self-pollinated, so they can still produce. Carrots, if you want them to produce seed, they're a biennial, so they need 2 seasons to produce seed. So those can be moved inside and put back out for a second season. I think there are a few others, but those are the ones that come to mind at the moment.
Okay. So Dustin asks, where can you buy retrofit sprinklers?
That is a really good question. A lot of the sprinkler supply stores will have them. So Sprinkler Supply, Sprinkler World, Mountain Land Supply. There are others, but those types of places will have them.
Sarian asking, what do you think of soaker hoses under mulch instead of drip lines in raised beds? Because they have found it easier to use those with their hose than drip lines.
So it can be done. We don't necessarily recommend it. There are some disadvantages to soaker hoses. You get more water at the beginning than you do at the end, and it's also not as controlled and doesn't emit the water as slowly, so it can water too quickly at times. So especially for in-ground beds, that can be a problem because the soils can't absorb the water as quickly, and so it can run off and not actually soak in.
And even under mulch, they will have problems with their little pores clogging up from water deposits, and they don't last very long. Yeah. I've used them a lot in the past.
Yeah.
Okay, and one quick one, what is a bubbler?
Oh, that's a good question. How to describe a bubbler? So it's a piece that connects to an irrigation system that puts out a lot of water a lot more quickly than drip emitters do. So it kind of just flows out of the little head, the bubbler piece, and just kind of floods the area. So which is not the most efficient way to water.
Sounds good. There's another question about soaker hoses and the difference between those and using blank tubing. I'm not sure if they know what the blank tubing is. Usually a feeder hose out to your lines. They rent a 4x20 space from an HOA and they don't have a permanent installation. So yeah, you use what you can, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, with the blank tubing, if you're not punching holes in it, it's not going to be emitting any water. So you would use that more with like point source emitters that you punch into those, which we'll talk about in just a couple of slides, how to use that.
And just the last one here for now is what is the best mulch to use?
Any
For
kind of organic
vegetables?
mulch is going to be fine. So compost, bark chips, what's the name of them? Arborist wood chips can be good. We would just recommend some kind of organic mulch that can break down and help improve the soil over time. So. Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. So this is an overhead view of a vegetable bed, and we're going to briefly discuss how the inline drip is laid out for this bed. Let's see. So this is the PVC pipe connection, and what that looks like. And then there are pieces that are adapters that can screw into the PVC pipe and then go directly onto the drip. And then at the corners, we have 90-degree elbows and T's to connect the rest of the lines on both ends. So we're making a closed loop with the water so that if some of the line gets pinched or something happens, then the water comes from both sides and can still water the whole bed. So with these built-in drip emitters, they're evenly spaced, and you can see our lines are evenly spaced as well. So if your emitters are 12 inches apart, then your lines you want to be 12 inches apart. So the spacing of the emitters is also how much space you want in between your lines, which in raised vegetable beds, since it is often a looser soil, the spacing is usually closer than in our heavy clay soils in the rest of our planting beds, where the emitters are farther apart. And this is roughly how the water spreads out underground. On the surface, you usually only see small dots of water, but underground it spreads and fills in the whole space. You can see on here on the ends, there are areas in between the T's and the elbows. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but where there are no emitters in that space because they just didn't end up in that section of pipe that we needed, which is generally okay, but you can see that there are a few spaces on the ends where it doesn't get as much coverage. If that is a concern for you, you can add in some of these bigger spaces, make sure that there is an emitter in that portion of pipe that you are installing. And that can help fill in those gaps. You don't need to worry about the areas in between the PVC and the first T. If it's too small of a space, don't worry about it. The other emitters will take care of that area and it will be fine. So this is, again, how the water moves underground. So this is a side view with the drip line and then how the water actually spreads underground. So the plants, it doesn't matter where they are, if they're next to an emitter or not, because it will cover the whole space. But when you're starting from seed, they can sometimes get missed with that water initially. So you might need to hand water for the first little while until they're up and growing and the irrigation system can take over. So this is point source drip that has the emitter lines that tap into the blank distribution tubing and then go to individual plants. This does work better in areas where you're putting in plants rather than seeds, because with seeds, you don't always know where those plants are going to be and where to put the irrigation. So this is again another overhead view of how that works. So we have some of the same main pieces. And we have the distribution tubing, and then the emitters that you punch into the line wherever you need them to be close to the plants or to be able to get water to the plants. And then you connect the spaghetti line tubing to those. You can also use multi-outlet drip manifolds rather than distribution tubing, that blank tube. These can be an option as well. And then they can be used when you want to water a nearby potted plant with similar water requirements as well. Ball valves. We do recommend adding ball valves to each raised box or section of your garden so that you have more control. And if you decide not to put something in a vegetable bed and leave it blank for a year, you can shut off the water to just that bed and just water the beds that you do have water in. So you can see those in this photo. That they're in each of these raised beds. And this is an example of when that comes in handy, because you can still water the rest of the planting beds, even though this one in the front is empty. They have that water shut off, so they're not watering it, wasting that water, and encouraging weeds to grow there. So one of the main concerns that people have with drip in a vegetable garden is that they're concerned that they won't be able to get as much produce and that their plants won't survive on drip. But this is an example of a vegetable garden that we have here that has done amazingly well. And you can get a lot of produce and have a lot of success with gardens on drip irrigation. So again, discussing plant water needs, this is where the hydrozoning comes in. So there are, again, the annual plants that grow from seed every year and don't have an extensive root system. And then the perennial plants that come back year after year and have a lot more extensive root systems that don't need as much water. And because they have such different watering needs, if we keep them separate, we can water just what they need and not be over watering our perennials to get the annuals enough water. So here are some examples of some annuals. So these do need to be on their own zones. So they should be grouped together for easier watering. You can include annual flowers in here as well. I know a lot of people like to put marigolds in their vegetable gardens, and that is great. Those are an annual flower, but because they're an annual, they have similar water needs as the annual vegetables. So they can be watered together and be fine. So we have carrots and cucumbers and tomatoes, pumpkins, tomatoes and squash. Here are some examples of some flowers that we sometimes put in our vegetable gardens. We have pansies and nasturtiums, and both of these flowers are also edible, which is fun. And like I said, you can combine some of your annual flowers with your vegetable gardens.
So are there any native ground covers?
Okay, did you have something?
Natalie, we have just a few more minutes.
Okay, sounds good. I will wrap up. Thank you, Ginger. So briefly, we have some perennials so that are produce some edible aspects to them, and they can be placed in the planting beds with other perennial plants because they have the similar watering requirements to other shrubs and perennials. So we have red currants, blackberries, English lavender, chives, and there are others. And so just briefly in garden maintenance, we have this weed control recipe that we recommend. We recommend watering with drip irrigation, so you're not watering new weed seeds. Applying organic mulch or crushed leaves or grass clippings without seed in it to help improve the soil. Avoiding soil compaction, minimizing tilling and disrupting the soil after you initially install your garden, and keeping lawn away from garden areas. So here is another example of keeping your lawn away from the garden areas and how that can reduce maintenance. And watering with drip irrigation and not over watering the plants. So keep an eye on them, water when they need it, but try not to over water. And keep your perennials away from your annuals so that they don't get overwatered as well. And again, please don't give up. Vegetable gardening is fun. Sometimes you have a bad year and sometimes it was nothing you did. Sometimes it's just nature. But don't give up. You can have success. And maybe next year you'll or this year, since we're at the beginning of the year, maybe this year you'll have more success than you did last year. Last year was a little bit of a weird year with some of the vegetables. And here is that website and the QR code for the USU Extension Services information on vegetable gardens and how to grow specific fruits and vegetables and herbs in Utah. So that can be a great resource. And with that, I think that is the end of my presentation.